Hi there, this is Eric Keller for ZBrush Jewelry Workshop. In this video, we're going to continue working on the Dumbo Octopus ring project that we started in the previous two videos. And of course, we're working with ZBrushCore 2021. So in the previous videos, I told you about Z-spheres, showed you how to convert Z-spheres into a mesh. We built this octopus and then posed his tentacles, getting him ready to sculpt. What I'd like to do next is organize the model into what's known as polygroups. So I mentioned polygroups in the previous videos kind of in passing, but they're a very important concept, and I think mastering polygroups is a big part of mastering ZBrushCore. What they are is basically a way to organize the actual polygon faces of your model so that you can easily remask or reselect as often as you need to just by selecting the polygroup. Polygroups are visible as color coding when you have the polyframe button on. If I turn this on and I have both line and fill highlighted, you can see that different colors are applied to the model. These are polygroups, and they were created with the Z-sphere. So we built the Z-sphere armature. It automatically created the polygroups as part of the model, and then when you convert to a mesh, the polygroups come through. So for example, the way that they're useful is I could isolate just this purple part of the head here by holding the Control and Shift key at the same time and clicking on it. So you can see now only that head part is visible. The other part hasn't been deleted, it's just been hidden. So that's how you select things. If I want to bring everything back, I can hold Control and Shift and click on a blank part of the canvas and everything comes back. If I press W to activate the gizmo, and I'm going to Control Select on this polygroup, you can see how the rest of the model becomes dark because it's been masked. So now I can move this around and manipulate it without affecting the rest of the model. So I'll hold the Control key, drag on the canvas and release, and Control click on another part of the model. So you can see this right here now is isolated from the rest of the model. So the rest of the model is masked and this part is unmasked. So now I can manipulate it, sculpt it, or do whatever I need to it. So that's how polygroups can be useful. Now the polygroups that have been created with this model are not super useful for what I want to do, but polygroups are very easy to make. They're temporary, change them as often as you like without worrying about affecting the model too much. So they make for a very convenient way to organize the model. So what I'd like to do is have a different polygroup for each tentacle so I can isolate those tentacles and move them independently if I decide to want to make them bigger or smaller, or repose them or whatever. So how can we do this? So I'm going to switch over to draw. I can press the Q hotkey or press this button right here. And I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and I'm going to click on this purple part of the model. And then I'm going to hold Control and Shift and click again. Now it inverts what's visible, so the head is invisible, or the top of the head is invisible and the rest of the model is still visible. If you notice, I have back face culling on. In other words, you can't see the back side of the polygons when we're looking inside the octopus. This, I think, can be a little bit confusing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the tool palette down to display properties and turn on double so that I can see both sides of the polygons. That'll make things easier. Okay, so I Control Shift clicked on the head once and then I did it again to invert the selection. Now I have to hold Control and Shift at the same time. I'm going to click on this part of the model to hide it. Control Shift click on this polygroup to hide it. Control Shift click on this polygroup to hide it. And Control Shift click on this polygroup to hide it. So now you can see, I'm going to turn on the solo button so we can hide the rest of the ring here. So we got one more polygroup right here. So I'm going to Control Shift click on this to hide it. So what we have now is just the tentacles visible and everything else is invisible. If I go into the Polygroups menu here in the tool palette, so I'm in Tool, go down to Polygroups, we have a bunch of buttons here that could be useful for creating new polygroups. If I press Group Visible, it's going to make one polygroup for all of the tentacles. So they're all purple now. The colors are chosen randomly, by the way. There's no way to control the colors. You just can keep recreating the polygroups until you have a color that you like, if you need to. The other button in here that's really useful is Autogroups. If I click on Autogroups, it's going to create a separate polygroup for each of the visible meshes, as long as these meshes aren't connected. So by hiding the rest of the octopus, I essentially tricked ZBrushCore into thinking that these meshes are not connected. They still are connected, it's just that the polygons have been hidden. So if I Control-Shift-Click on a blank part of the canvas, you can see the rest of the octopus comes back, but now we have a polygroup for each different leg. So if I press W for the gizmo and Control-Click on this tentacle, now I can isolate this tentacle, make it smaller, bigger, whatever, sculpt on it, it's fine. Control-Click on this tentacle, same thing. So that's going to be very useful as we continue to work on this. So let's create another polygroup for just the head part right here. So I'm going to press Q, hold Control and Shift, and I'm going to click on this tentacle to isolate it. Control-Shift-Click on it again to invert the selection, and now Control-Shift-Click on each of these tentacle polygroups to hide them. So the sequence in which you Control-Shift-Click on these polygroups actually makes a difference. It takes a little practice. I'm going to Control-Shift-Click on this, and then Control-Shift-Click on this, and now I just have the head selected, so I'm going to press Control-W, which is the hotkey for Group Visible. So Group Visible, Control-W, hotkey, same thing. And now I have a polygroup just for the head. I'm going to Control-Shift-Click on a blank part of the canvas. And now I think we have a decent polygroup arrangement. I think the one last polygroup I'm going to make is I don't need a separate polygroup for this part right here, or this part. So what I want to do is I want to isolate the visibility of just these two polygroups. Well, they share a vertex. So if I Control-Shift-Click on this vertex, it's going to hide everything except for the two polygroups that share that vertex. And now I can either do Group Visible or Control-W. Let's do Control-W again, get something a little bit less green as a color. Now you can see we have a polygroup for this. I'll Control-Shift-Click on a blank part of the canvas. And now we have a nice polygroup arrangement for our whole model. Don't freak out if you see this face disappearing. It's just because it's getting reversed in the angle. As we subdivide it, we'll take care of that, so it won't happen anymore. But it's just a display issue. I'm gonna bring up my draw size, hold the Shift key, and just smooth that vertex right there. So now we shouldn't have that problem anymore. Yeah, it's gone. Okay, so I'm going to save this as Dumbo Octopus 05.zpr. Okay, it's not quite a Dumbo Octopus yet because it's missing little fins, the little Dumbo things. So if you do an image search for Dumbo Octopus, you'll see that they have these big fins or wings or whatever you call them on an octopus coming out of the side of the head, hence the name. Very cute. You also notice there's a wide variety in terms of the length of their tentacles and their shape. So we're going to use that variety to our advantage as we make this. But you could choose to make it however you like. There's lots of different variations to choose from. Okay, so how can we make these fins coming out of the side of the head? There's lots of ways you could do it. We could have done it with Z-spheres. There's no reason. The only reason I didn't use Z-spheres is because I wanted to demonstrate other techniques. I am going to turn on symmetry across the x-axis. So I'm going to press X to activate symmetry. It's still set to radial symmetry. So I'll go to the transform palette, turn off R for radial, set this to X, and turn off Y. So I just have symmetry across the x-axis, right? And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on sculptress mode. So let's switch to the snake hook brush, and I'm going to turn on sculptress mode. Now what this means is that if I drag on the surface, you can see I can pull out a part of the surface as if it was clay, and while I'm pulling it out, it's subdividing the surface right here. So it's definitely changing the topology. So we're going to have to do a ZRemesh to fix that, but we don't have to worry about that until we've got the basic shape for our little fins here. So while sculptress mode is active, it will affect most of the sculpting brushes with the exception of like the move brush. So if I switch to move and I start pulling on the surface, it will definitely pull the surface, but you see it's not creating new geometry as I do that. If I hold the shift key to smooth, you'll see that sculptress mode, whenever this is highlighted, sculptress mode, meaning this automatic subdivision process, is active. So if I hold the shift key, you can see that that's definitely subdividing while it smooths. And the draw size has a big influence on the density of that subdivision. But you can see a very quick way to create some extra geometry here to make our little fins. So I'm just going to make a rough shape here. I'm not going to worry about getting into details just yet. So I'm going to pull this out into a rough leaf-like kind of shape. This is a sculptural blockout, meaning I'm only concerned about the primary forms and the overall shape and just getting enough geometry so that I can add detail. So that's all I care about at the moment. So I think that works. I don't think they need to be any thinner than that. So now the only problem, of course, is that I've messed up my nice geometry. So the Z-sphere topology had a nice topology going, low density, not very many polygons, which makes it easier to work with as we subdivide. But I've ruined that by using Sculptress mode. So you can see now I'm at 15,000 points. I'm going to hold the Shift key and turn Sculptress mode off just by clicking on this. So now that it's off, if I hold Shift and brush over the surface, you see it's not making any more polygons. It's just smoothing, which is what the smooth brush normally does. To fix the topology, I'm going to use ZRemesher, which is ZBrushCore's automatic retopology tool, and it's pretty easy to use and extremely convenient. So I'm going to go into the tool palette, and under geometry, I'm going to expand ZRemesher, and I'm going to turn on the half button, meaning that as it ZRemeshes, it's going to shoot for getting half these number of polygons you see here. So around 7,000 or so. It's going to get as close to that as it possibly can. I find that using the half option and just repeatedly ZRemeshing is a great way to kind of preserve the overall shape of the model, better than if half is turned off. So I'm going to hit ZRemesh. This is just a reminder letting you know that the full version of ZBrush has many more options for ZRemesh. This is just kind of the basic functionality and offers you the option to upgrade, of course. We're just going to hit OK though. And it's going to calculate, and here is the result. So the result is actually more than half of 15,000. I'm sure that's because of the Sculptress thing, but you can see now we have a topology that's kind of even. One big problem though, you can see that it's screwed up our model, and that is because I had Symmetry turned on and I forgot. So let's press Ctrl Z to undo that. I'm going to press X to turn Symmetry off. So you can see if I hover over there, we no longer have Symmetry on. And let's try ZRemesh again. All right, it's got a remeshing error. So if you're getting errors while you're ZRemeshing your model, what you could do is hold the Shift key, turn Sculptress mode on, and just brush over the surface to remove any weird geometry. I also have my draw size fairly large, which tends to make slightly larger polygons. So I turned Symmetry off, so let's go in here and just do this real quick. Okay, let's give this a try. So I'm going to go under a ZRemesher and hit ZRemesher. There we go. So now we have a nice topology. We lost our polygroups, but don't worry, I can remake them pretty quickly. So let's do another ZRemesh. We're just going to lower the polygon count. So just ZRemeshing over and over again. As you can see, each time I do it, it does retopologize the surface. Now we're getting kind of a nice edge flow right here between these tentacles. And we're down to about 8,000 polygons. Let's do just a couple more. See how low we can get it. The fewer polygons we have, the easier it will be to keep details smooth and surfaces nice and clean and neat as we sculpt. So I think if we get it down to, let's see, I think it's going to just stop at that point. Okay, so we got it down to about 5,308. We lost our polygroups and some of our detail. That's okay. I think we can work with this. So here's some tricks for bringing back those polygroups or recreating them easily on these coiling intertwined tentacles. What I'm going to do is let's turn off Sculptress mode. So I'm holding the Shift key. I'm going to turn off Sculptress mode, and I'm going to hold Shift and just smooth this end here just to kind of clean those overlapping polygons. Now I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and I'm going to go into the brush palette, and I'm going to choose Select Lasso. So the way Select Lasso works is if I hold Control and Shift, I can drag a selection around some of these faces, and then when I release, it hides everything except those faces. And then I could do Control W to create a new polygroup. Control Shift click on a blank part of the canvas, and you can see now I have a polygroup for this, just the tip of this tentacle. I'd actually rather have a polygroup for the whole tentacle. So there's a trick that you can do with the Select Lasso brush. So I'm going to switch to Select Lasso by holding the Control and Shift keys. And I'm going to hover over an edge here, and I'm going to Control Shift click on that edge. And it hides that whole edge loop at the root of that tentacle, right? So let's do that again. I'm going to hold Control and Shift, click on this edge, and it's created a nice, neat, clean break around there, except for that one. So let's do this. Control Shift click on this edge. It's just anywhere where I have a nice, neat loop around it. Hopefully we won't have any spirals. Hold Control and Shift, click on this. That works. Control Shift click there, and that works. Control Shift click right there, that works. And that works. That works. And that works. And so what I've done is I basically, since I have a separation by hiding those polygons, remember they're not deleted, they're just hidden. By creating that separation there, I can trick ZBrush again into thinking these are separate meshes. So if I go into Polygroups and choose Autogroups, it creates a separate polygroup for each disconnected mesh. And now I'm going to hold Control and Shift, click on a blank part of the canvas, bring back the rest of the mesh. The only problem, of course, is that now I have a polygroup for this tentacle, a polygroup for the body, and a polygroup for this band around the tentacle, which I don't want. I don't need a polygroup there. I'm going to lower my draw size, hold Control and Shift, and click on this point that's shared by both of these polygroups. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift, drag a selection around this whole tentacle, just to hide everything else, and then press Control W for Group Visible. Now I'm going to hold Control and Shift, click on a blank part of the canvas. You can see, I mean, they're both blue, but they're slightly different shades, but we have two different polygroups here. So let's do that again. Control Shift click on this point to hide everything except for the shared polygroups. And then, actually what I could do, save myself some trouble, I'm going to do Autogroups. So this creates a polygroup for this tentacle, but also separate polygroups for these guys. Now, I know this takes practice. This can be a bit overwhelming. I'm going to hold Control and Shift, click on this point to isolate. And I'm not being sarcastic. It really is overwhelming. I had to go through a lot of practice to start to understand this workflow. So that's why I say mastering polygroups is the key to mastering ZBrushCore. But with some practice, it will start to make more and more sense. Okay, sorry for the pontification there. I'm going to press Control W to group visible. Let's do it a couple more times, get a slightly different color there. That works. Control Shift click on the canvas. Control Shift click on this point right here. Control W, create a new polygroup. Control Shift click on the canvas. You can see how it starts to become a flow. Control Shift click on this point shared by the two polygroups. Control W to create a new polygroup. Control Shift click on the canvas. Again, Control Shift click on this point. Control W to create a polygroup for that tentacle. Control Shift click on that canvas to bring everything back. Oops, do the same thing here. Control W. Control Shift click on this point. Control W. And now I have a polygroup for my body and a polygroup for each tentacle. In the full version of ZBrush, you do have the option in ZRemesher of keeping the polygroup, so you don't have to go through that. So that's one of the differences between ZBrush and ZBrushCore. But in any case, we found a workaround, and now we have our tentacles and our body polygrouped and a new topology, and we have our little Dumbo wings there as well. So let's save this. So I'm going to save this as Dumbo Octopus 06.zpr. So ZBrushCore is just like anything else. It takes some practice. I highly recommend doing exercises like this to really understand polygroups. It'll make your life a lot easier as you get more advanced with your sculpting skills. And in the next video, we're going to get into some actual sculpting.